Due to the full-scale invasion, we will probably learn to take care of our mental health. Among those working in Ukraine, approximately 39 to 40% were in the risk zone. Depressive or anxiety disorders, or even both, may develop further.
After night shellings, there are some meetings you conduct and you realize that people are in an altered state, meaning they are not efficient right here and now. Something needs to be done about it.
That's not my problem. That's not me. I'm fine. It's them.
When we externalize responsibility, that is, shift it onto someone else, it doesn't make things any easier for us. We still get crushed by the fact that the issue remains unresolved. Every day that we are physically inactive, we're putting money into the piggy bank of mental disorder.
The good news is that, looking at this list, we're all unhealthy people.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Board of Directors channel with Sergiy Bulavin. Today we're going to talk about a topic related to the reality we currently live and work in. This reality is connected to Russia's invasion into Ukraine and the full-scale war. How does this affect the quality of our decisions, the way we work, and how our teams operate? Joining me are our guests Dmytro Kozlov and Oksana Yuryk.
Friends, hello. Well, you already know me, so I'll be very brief and introduce myself. I'm an independent professional corporate director. I work on supervisory and advisory boards.
Good afternoon. Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Oksana Yuryk. I am a senior business trainer, business consultant, coach, and partner at the international consulting and training company Develop. I have an additional qualification as organizational mental health consultant. I've been working in consulting since 2008, so this is my 17th year. And I interact with a huge number of people from the corporate sector across very different levels, from the general staff to top management and boards of directors. I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Great, thank you. We are now living in a reality in which almost every night our cities are attacked by Shahed drones and missiles. This creates a certain level of stress. On top of that, both we and our teams are sleep deprived. Plus, this is stress that has been ongoing for almost 3 years now, and it keeps building up. Of course, it has an impact. It affects our work with our teams, it affects relationships within the teams, it affects the quality of the decisions we make, and this happens regardless of the region of Ukraine we work in, because those who are in frontline cities, they have their own constant stress. Those who are, for example, in Kiev, like us right now, we have our own stress. Because of these constant bombings at night, that stress also builds up. In your opinion, how does this affect business, its efficiency, and the decisions made by both teams and top management? And how can this stress be identified?
First of all, let's focus on the fact that organizations are made up of people. And I have some statistics ready on how this war-induced stress affects people. There are international assessments, for example. It is believed that in the case of a major war, 1 in 5 people will feel the consequences personally. That's 20%. And 1 in 10 will experience these consequences in the form of a severe or moderately severe condition. We're talking about serious mental disorders. So 10% will have very noticeable issues that they will have to pay attention to. And this applies to the general population, to people with steady jobs, to those who make decisions every day, and to those who sit on boards of directors. Jumping ahead a bit, I'll say that the people who remain functional to this day, pardon my French, we've been a bit lucky. Here we are, able to talk about this topic. That means we have some kind of unearned advantage. What does that mean? It means that our mom and dad, nature, gave us a stronger nervous system. What does that mean? There are people who cope better with this kind of stress. Both the stress related to workload and the stress caused by the full-scale invasion. And some people, they can't handle it. So the way it affects decision-making really depends on each person's capacity, their individual threshold of sensitivity. In boards of directors and among top management, based on my modest observations, it's mostly people those who can handle it, who manage.
Are more stress resistant.
I don't like that word. When you hear the word resistant, what comes to your mind?
Military.
Socrates.
Oh, yes. And if we talk about adjectives, what kind of person is resistant? How would you replace that word?
Solid. Fixed.
Fixed, firm, and possibly insensitive. But here we need to talk about resilience. You asked me earlier what this little ball is for. If I had, why would I need it, though? An egg. I can just take a glass of water. If I let go of it now and the glass falls to the floor, what will happen to it? It will crack. It's solid, but at the same time it's not resilient, meaning it can't return to its original shape. The ball, no matter how hard I squeeze it, it returns to its original shape. If we hit it, when it hits a surface, it deforms, then returns to its original shape. So the ball is resilient. I don't really like the word resistant, even though it's used in psychology. But when we hear resistant, as you said, firm and unfeeling, it implies that we should allow ourselves to experience a range of emotions, to feel. The key is that we then have the ability to return to a balanced psychological state. That is, people in top management, on boards of directors. They tend to have higher resilience more often. That ability to return to a balanced psychological state, that's what matters. All right, for people with a high level of resilience, does it affect the decisions they make? Yes, it does, because they still experience stress. And when our fight or flight pattern kicks in, it might seem like, oh, people are making quick decisions. At that moment, yes, but research shows that when we're in fight or flight mode, we make certain decisions, and we're highly stressed. Those decisions tend to be superficial, they're obvious. We don't generate any unconventional ideas, nothing creative, interesting, or complex. In order to come up with something creative, we need to have a moderate level of anxiety. Anxiety can't be at 0 level. If our anxiety is at 0, we cross the street and get hit by a car because we're not anxious and we're not looking around. We need to have a moderate level of anxiety. I hope I've at least somewhat answered your question.
Yes, indeed. Probably what is inherently within us certainly gives us the ability to be more resilient in the current situation. On the other hand, and probably even with the same qualities and skills, not everyone can withstand different circumstances. By different, I mean there are many people, business owners, who lost their businesses because they were left in occupied territory. There are many who have lost their loved ones, either as civilians or military. There are many people who lost their homes and were forced to relocate. And all of this has an impact. Regardless, probably of a person's level of resilience, there can be different reactions, even from the same person, to different circumstances.
I absolutely agree with that. By the way, speaking of resilience, a few words about the definition. Resilience is the ability to cope with stress in a constructive way. Stress that life serves us on a platter. And on the one hand, this ability is inborn. For example, people who are prevailing extroverted ones, those commonly referred to as cholerics and sanguines, have a better starting point. They have a higher initial inborn level of resilience. Why? Because such people naturally tend to share what they feel inside, and that helps. They essentially self-psychotherapize, if you can put it that way. But this ability, resilience, can be developed, just like muscles can be trained. So even if your starting point isn't great, it can still be improved. By what? By working with a psychotherapist, taking care of yourself, your mental health, and your brain. Due to COVID, we learned to wash our hands. Due to the full-scale invasion, we'll probably learn to take care of our brains.
Listen, you mentioned 20%, but it seemed to me that the percentage of people under stress is much higher. Right now, it looks like way more people are stressed.
Here we're talking about who will experience consequences at the level of mental health, not just any stress. It manifests as some kind of mental disorder.
If it's only 20%, what were you trying to say? Or rather, here's a question for you. Should we even be concerned about this topic at all? Well, that's not a lot. It's not 50, not 40, not 60. So is there any statistic? Based on your experience, since you've worked with large, small, and medium-sized businesses, how accurate is that percentage? Is it actually higher when we talk about going back to business? Is this really something we should be paying attention to? Is it really something worth addressing?
Yes, it definitely needs to be addressed. Our organization conducts psycho-emotional screenings in companies upon request. What does that include? We measure the impact of various factors, starting from how clearly I understand the scope of my tasks, how well I understand the expectations placed on me. There are also questions like, do I feel respected by my colleagues? Because that too adds stress that isn't caused by the war. Then we also ask about how much relationships within the team have deteriorated, subjectively. Because when everyone else is feeling bad, it's unlikely that I'll be feeling good. This is where we start measuring the impact caused by the war. And we also incorporate into this survey, into this psycho-emotional screening, a basic standardized questionnaire for identifying signs of depressive symptoms and anxiety disorders. Because these are the disorders that start to bloom wildly under such circumstances. You all know about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but it starts with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And the results we're getting are roughly as follows. I have prepared statistics from a survey that was conducted in 2023, a huge international company operating in Ukraine. So among those working in Ukraine, approximately 39 to 40% were in the risk zone. This means that these people are showing various symptoms that could be treated as early indicators of further development of depressive or anxiety disorders, or even both. That is 20%. This means when the war ends, these people, 20%, will feel that their mental health was affected. But the 40% I'm talking about now, this means these people here and now are feeling unwell right now.
But it's not a given that, well, when it all ends, maybe
they will return to normal. The human psychics is flexible. It can cope with a lot, even with the kind of horror we are living through right now. Should we be concerned, Dmytro, answering your question? Yes, yes, and once again, yes. 3 exclamation marks. Why? Because what is the main purpose of the business? Business must ensure first and foremost continuity. And that comes at the expense of what and whom. In other words, using what resource. The question is obvious, and so is the answer. People. They are the ones who ensure this business continuity. That's business continuity. And if a person can't be productive, our main resource, they are incapable. That's why caring for people is essential. Why? Because otherwise there will be no continuity, no processes. That's why it's important to care.
So the 20% and 10% is clear. These are people who will experience consequences after the war ends. But we can already see it even now, for example, after a night bombing. There are some meetings you hold and you realize that people are in an altered state, meaning they are inefficient. Right here and now, and something needs to be done about it, because making decisions, collective decisions, for example, during a board discussion, when everyone has gone through stress at night, didn't get enough sleep in the morning, and are trying to keep it together, but in reality, it shows they're not the same as usual. Of course, in such a state, making decisions is probably going to be wrong. Those decisions will be incorrect, inefficient, not sharp, of course, low quality. So what do we do about it?
Well then, let's move on to how to work on your own resilience. And allow me to tell a joke. I just can't resist. When people ask how to deal with their stress response, here's the joke. Young parents, very progressive ones, come to a pediatrician, an old gray-haired professor, and say, listen, we've enrolled the child in early development classes, swimming, dynamic gymnastics, but something's not right with the child. The elderly professor asks, tell me, please, how many times a day do you feed the child? The parents go, we knew it. We must have missed something. Speaking about how to deal with stress, let's first define what stress actually is, because here too, it seems like we all know what it is. But I'm sure that most people don't quite understand this phenomenon correctly. So what is stress? This term was introduced not by a psychologist, but by a physiologist, Hans Selye. And stress, by the way, isn't just when we get scared. Stress also occurs when our body is attacked by a virus. During COVID-19, we experienced both psychological and physiological stress. So what is stress? It's the body's response. It's not something that just hits us from the outside. Stress is the body's response to certain conditions, demands, the environment. Or these demands and conditions can also come from within, and according to our perception, they significantly exceed our capabilities. This means that everything that happens is more or less neutral. Whether it's stress or not depends on our reaction, our stress response. What triggers such a response is called a stressor or stress factor. That's why the same event can trigger a stress response in one person and in another. The stress response can be very mild. In other words, people have very different sensitivity thresholds to what's happening. This is actually called sensitivity. And in order to train yourself and become more resilient, you can teach yourself not to react so intensely to what's happening. Now, let's discuss the main topic, which is about night shelling. I'm sure you've also noticed in board meetings, some people show up and it's like, well, let's go. What needs to be done? I'm ready. And some people just fall apart completely, and it's very hard for them to put themselves together. This is also one of the indicators of a person's resilience. The organ responsible for our psychological state, first and foremost, is the brain. And here, I really like the approach of Daniel Ayman. In English, his last name is Ayman, translated into Ukrainian, though no one really translates surnames, but still it's Daniel Ayman. He's an American psychiatrist. He has a database of 160,000 MRI brain scans from people in 155 different countries. And he says that 80% of various symptoms and mental disorders can be treated or at least eased simply by restoring brain health. The issue here is not only psychological discomfort, but the fact that the brain is neglected. And with your permission, I'll write down the formula right here and now. He really likes this acronym. It's called Bright Minds. Bright. Brains, let's put it that way. I'll decode it now. I'll start from the end. Letter S stands for sleep. Yes, I remember what you asked about. You asked how to make it so that people can make decisions during a morning meeting. May I approach you with a very delicate question? How many hours do you sleep on average?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Ask Sergey next. I sleep 8 hours, sometimes 9.
Fantastic. What about you, Sergey?
from 4 to 5. And it's not related to the war.
You're really at risk. Sorry for being so straightforward. Ideally, it should be 7 to 9 hours. Different people have different needs. Right. 8 hours is a myth, as everyone's needs vary individually. There's one big but, not less than 6 hours. Why is it like this? Why is it going so? Our brain functions somewhat differently, unlike other organs. Our brain is surrounded by a certain fluid. That is, it floats inside our cranium. What is this fluid for? It cushions certain injuries, certain impacts. And when we sleep, this fluid flows in, and our brain gets a shower in the literal sense. Why is that necessary? The thing is, during life processes, beta amyloid plaques form in the brain. Their purpose is still not understood. The only thing that is known for sure, definitively, is that people who had Alzheimer's, when an autopsy is performed post-mortem, well, you understand what I mean, their brains are literally filled with these beta amyloid plaques. And what our sleep does, if it's long enough, the brain has time to take this kind of shower, and the spinal fluid washes out these waste products, including beta amyloid plaques. If we sleep less than 6 hours, our brain remains cluttered. And that means we are artificially, with our own hands, bringing neurodegenerative processes closer. Okay, you understand, right? This is very serious. How quickly can we repay this sleep debt? It takes 2 weeks to repay it. So if I didn't get enough sleep today, and I sleep more tomorrow. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. We can't make up for it in just a few weeks, and that's very serious. After the age of 35, it becomes extremely serious, because after 35, these processes become more active, the ones related to aging.
Life is scary after 35. No.
Shall we continue? Blood flow refers to how properly, consistently, and actively it functions. Our brain is nourished through blood circulation, which supplies it with oxygen. This means we need to monitor our blood pressure. And another important point, by the way, this is being talked about a lot now, is what can actually improve our resistance to stress. This is physical activity. Let me digress for a moment and say that when we go through a stress response, our cortisol levels rise. Cortisol, in fact, is a good substance, because it's due to cortisol that we wake up in the morning. That's why we're a bit, well, unfriendly in the morning, because of cortisol. That was a joke. But when we experience toxic stress, meaning chronic stress, there's a lot of cortisol, and it's eliminated from the body like a virus through fluids. You need to consume a lot of fluids, water, but that's not what we're talking about right now, right? Ideally, the fluid should be warm and not sweetened. Because here's the thing. One of the factors, we're looking at risk factors that can affect the health of an organ like the brain. Now, let's talk about physical activity. Cortisol is also eliminated thanks to the muscles. In fact, muscles are now considered an endocrine organ. So physical activity helps supply the brain with oxygen and remove cortisol. Let's move on. Letter R. Retirement. This doesn't refer to retirement in the traditional sense, even though the common meaning is a person going to pension. Here it refers to when we stop learning, when we stop giving our brain challenging tasks. Supervisory board members have a huge advantage because they always have complex tasks in front of them. When we stop giving our brain challenging tasks, our brain gets lazy and starts to gradually deteriorate.
To degrade.
Absolutely. I was looking for a more ethical, softer way to put it. You know how they say, use it or lose it. Let's move on. Letter I. Daniel Amen uses it as inflammation. That's inflammation. What is it about? If something is wrong with our digestive tract, people who serve on boards of directors get stomach ulcers. Well, it's a stressful job. Or if we have a toothache and we don't treat it, that's inflammation. And it has an impact. Through the bloodstream, it affects the brain. Let's move on. Letter G stands for genetics. I've already mentioned that people who are on boards of directors usually have advantages. They have a better starting point because they are most likely genetically strong. That's exactly why they are where they are. What does this mean? If there is a history of mental illness in the family, in the medical history, it means we need to be more attentive to ourselves. It's not a sentence. You know how they say that genetics loads the gun? But the conditions we live in and our behavior, our choices, they pull the trigger. That's why we need to know a bit more. And also, when we talk about genetics, it's not just about DNA. We inherit a kind of starting platform for resilience, depending on what behavioral models were nurtured in the family. For example, blame. Instead of looking for solutions to problems, they looked for someone to blame. this gets passed on to us and we continue to act the same way. This means that we, on our own, with our own hands, well, with our words and actions, we nurture the development of a mental disorder within ourselves.
I think that, for the most part, most people look for someone to blame outside of themselves. But on the other hand, it's like, it's not me, it's someone else, I don't know. The government, friends, co-workers, and so on. And it seems like you think, well, it's not my problem, it's not me, I'm fine, it's them.
But does it really happen that way? If that were the case, it's not my problem. Then I would feel at peace.
So they don't actually feel at peace?
Acceptance doesn't happen.
Acceptance doesn't happen, right?
When we think that they are like this or that, not good enough, or that these ones don't even know how to do their job, we start a kind of spiral, an endless one, where we keep going in circles, with negative thoughts, and they do us a lot of harm. So when we externalize responsibility, meaning we shift it onto someone else, it doesn't actually make us feel any better.
Well, that's because on some subconscious level, we still understand that it's our fault.
We still feel crushed by the fact that the issue remains unresolved.
Problems remain.
Well, yes, true.
It doesn't matter who's to blame for it. It doesn't get resolved regardless. The problem stays, keeps circling in your head.
Dmytro, you're absolutely right that when we shift responsibility onto someone else, it's like we're all saints.
Well, yes.
But the question is whether I'm now confident that those I shifted the responsibility to will actually resolve it. There's no such confidence, and we still end up not at peace.
But is there such a request from people who blame others saying, not me, them? You have to understand that at first you need to realize that there's a problem. Something happened, something bad, and that's it. It's not me, it's them. But understanding what your own part in the problem is, that's also an art, I'd say.
Exactly, and that's exactly what consulting is based on. What exactly is the core problem? And is it really that problem we're trying to solve? And who can influence its resolution? Understanding who it concerns, who could have an impact. And when, in coaching, a client says, what should I do when those people responsible for this aren't doing anything? The coach's usual response is, I can't help you with that. I can only help you understand how you can influence the resolution of this problem. Because you came to coaching, and we don't treat those people, we work with you. But if there is this kind of behavior pattern in the family, whether we want to or not, we end up inheriting it. And until this awareness happens, I, as a leader, I, as a member of the board of directors, if I realize that, wait, we're not looking for someone to blame. Our task is to understand what the core of the problem is, how we can influence the root cause of this problem, and what I can do through my decisions to make it possible to solve this problem, rather than saying,
well, yes, someone else. It's not me, it's someone else.
Let's move on. Right now, we're going through bright minds. These are 11 risk factors for brain health. So in order to be resilient, the brain must first be healthy. So after the letter G, we have the letter H. It stands for head trauma. In order to build a foundation for this resilience, we need to make sure that any head injuries we've had are properly healed. We're talking about injuries here. Physical ones, yes. Because they affect brain health, influence our psycho-emotional state, and then the chain continues on and on. Letter T stands for toxins. And when we talk about toxins, we're talking about things like, obviously, the psychoactive substances, such as alcohol. I'm not a complete teetotaler. At the same time, what's important, by the way, we talked about sleep here, at least 6 hours. If we drink alcohol to relax, I know that nowadays for many people, this is just such an element. I want to give myself some peace, so 50 grams at night might bring me some calm and help. It helps temporarily. This is called maladaptive coping, but in the end, what happens? We don't sleep. We do sleep, but we don't recover. It's a trance. That's why doctors even joke about it nowadays. Want a drink? Drink in the morning. Don't drink before bed. And right away, people ask, okay, how long before sleep can you drink? It's very individual. I know that when I drink, I feel the effects of alcohol for 16 to 24 hours, considering my weight and my specific metabolism.
Both weight, age, and metabolism.
Yes. And the older I get, the longer I feel the effects of that alcohol. You know, as the joke goes back in the day, I could party all night, wake up in the morning, and feel great. Then I'd wake up and feel that I had been partying. And now, it's like I've slept all night, woke up, and it feels like I partied all night. So, as we age, our ability to recover changes. And that's why toxins include psychoactive substances, including alcohol. And another very important element that we often forget about is mold. If there's mold in the office, it has an impact. It's a very potent toxin, a neurotoxin, and it has a strong effect on brain function.
Well, it could be the environment. It's not just fungus. It could be other things too.
Yes. For example, firefighters and lifeguards suffer from other toxins. Carbon monoxide has a very strong effect on brain function. We experience poisoning, not just the kind that manifests as red eyes or causes vomiting. And this affects brain activity, meaning we need to eliminate the effects of toxins.
Oksana, to what extent, for example, can the absence of toxins in the body compensate for a lack of sleep? That's my personal question. I have an ascetic practice regarding alcohol starting from 24/02, 2022.
Wow, I'm envious for you. That's a good thing. At the same time, it's like asking who's more important, mom or dad. Sorry for such an unethical comparison. Getting enough sleep is important. Why? Because there are studies that talk about this. There have been studies for quite some time now showing that a person who lacks sleep starts behaving like someone who has consumed a certain amount of alcohol, even if they haven't actually had any alcohol. In other words, the brain becomes, I don't want to use various comparisons, but it is affected. It has an effect. It's really important.
It doesn't compensate.
It doesn't compensate. Unfortunately, no matter how much we'd like it to. Let's move on.
Maybe it will compensate eventually. So let's continue.
That's the thing. These 11 risk factors for brain health, they're not optional. Like, you need to have at least 5 of them addressed. No, there are 11 of them. Letter M is for mindstorms. We understand that this abbreviation was proposed by a psychiatrist who studies how the brain works. He says that mindstorms are a kind of abnormal electrical activity in the temporal lobe of the brain. Temporal refers to temples. This can be seen on an electroencephalogram. We ourselves wouldn't feel it. It's only if we undergo some kind of examination. And then, for example, anti-epileptic drugs may be prescribed.
Is that for people with epilepsy?
Not necessarily. For people who have epilepsy, of course, this point is a risk group.
Is it some kind of physiological reaction? Physiological reaction of the brain to something?
Not necessarily to something. It can occur without any cause.
It can be triggered by anything.
Yes.
And it occurs within epileptics?
Among people who have epilepsy.
But it can also occur among ordinary people.
Among ordinary people who have not been diagnosed with epilepsy.
But can't we detect it, or only using MRI?
Electroencephalography. It's a simpler device because with an MRI, you have to lie still and not move. With an electroencephalograph, they put a cap with electrodes on your head and observe which...
There are no external signs that we can feel?
You may feel something like a headache, for example. It's still unclear exactly where he originally came from. So this could possibly mean all the headaches sometimes. No one really knows where they mysteriously came from. I agree with you. It's hard not to. So, next up, as for letter I, we have the immune system and the infections. What is this about? If the immune system is in poor condition, the brain is also in poor condition. What can be done about it? Vitamins. Daniel Amen says it directly. You need to support your body. You need to take omega-3, vitamin D3, for example, which helps calcium get absorbed, and many other things. But we must always consult with our family doctor. Do I take supplements? I do take supplements. Omega-3 is a must. By the way, a sufficient amount of omega-3 can even ease the symptoms of depressive disorder. That's how beneficial omega-3 is. Let's move on. What is this next one? Letter N here. Let me write it down first. Neurohormonal. Various disorders. What are we talking about? In order for the brain to function properly, we need to make sure our thyroid gland is also working properly. What are the symptoms of a malfunctioning thyroid gland? Constant fatigue, anxiety that seems to come out of nowhere. Oh, and now everyone is feeling that. Before going to a psychiatrist, you should see an endocrinologist. People aged 35 and up, and definitely those over 40 should have it checked every 2 years. And this D letter that we haven't decoded yet, it's... Yes, Daniel Amen calls it diabesity. It's a tendency toward diabetes and excess weight. What is that about? It's about the fact that if we have a sweet breakfast, we give ourselves a glucose spike first thing in the morning, and then there's a drop in glucose levels. Insulin behaves the same way, and that means our brain can't function properly, because an excess amount of sugar in the blood is a toxin. And insulin tries to remove that excess amount somehow, and that means that our hormonal system is operating in emergency, non-standard mode. Our ancestors didn't consume such large amounts of sugar, and they were healthier. You know for sure that those ancestors they have good teeth.
Yes, they only lived up to 20 years old. They lived around 25, 30 years.
not quite right. They didn't live just 25, 30 years. The average life expectancy was 25, 30 years, but what affects the average lifespan? That is the percentage of infants who die before reaching 1 year of age. That doesn't mean they only lived 25, 30 years. They could live up to 60 years. It's just that a huge number of newborns died. And that's why the average life expectancy across the population comes out to 25, 30. Not 25, 30, they live longer than that. I already had dental problems by the time I was 30. So, what is it that we've listed? These are the things we need to take care of. This is the foundation, after which we can start talking, okay, on a psychological level, about how to process those stressors. In other words, this is the base. Without this base, any family doctor should, when you come in and say, "Oh, I feel so anxious," ask you, "How much do you sleep? And how is your diet? 3 times a week or 3 times a day? How much fluid do you consume? And what about your blood pressure?" So what does a family doctor do? They go through these things. And what is that? They ask, "Do you smoke?" You don't have to answer if you prefer. This is really exactly about the impact of these toxins.
The good news is that looking at this list, we are all unhealthy people. And as my coach used to say, pardon the doctor's expression, there are no healthy people, only those who haven't been examined. Well, I don't know anyone who has everything from this list. All of the items, all in good shape.
Even without the significant impact of the war.
Yes, even without the impact of the war.
And that's even without the impact of the war, which has a very strong effect on the immune system. Remember the beginning of the full-scale invasion. People worked like crazy because we came together, regrouped, and got to work. And we conducted our first study in May 2022. And even back then, managers, top executives, and HR directors were telling us, we understand that this will end someday. And then, closer to the fourth quarter, big number of people started getting sick. That's because when we experience such a stress response, such stress factors, we mobilize, take a loan from the immune system, and then the immune system says, I can't do it anymore. So it hits here, then it affects our hormonal system, it impacts our ability to sleep. That's why establishing good sleep is one of the first things to do. In the context of the full-scale invasion, sleep is the top priority. Yes, you know, nowadays there's not even a debate among researchers about what's more important, physical activity and nutrition, or sleep. Sleep comes first. They argue about what comes second, physical activity or balanced nutrition.
Nutrition it is.
Well, doctors and researchers aren't entirely sure. They say a sufficient amount of physical activity is important. In our brain, 2/3 of the cells are responsible for motor activity. I remember when I was studying a course on mental health in organizations, we had a professor who used to say that every day we are physically inactive. We're putting money into the piggy bank of mental disorder. In other words, we're not just staying at zero, in a neutral state. We're going into the negative. That's why sometimes, during individual work with clients, even when the person already seems to have an action plan and the problem seems to be getting resolved, we're not on the first session anymore. But I still see the person in a state of frustration. You know what I ask? Tell me, please, how many steps have you taken today? And the person looks at me and I ask, are you counting or recalling? They say, no, I'm recalling when I went outside. And the answer was the day before yesterday. That means that in a whole day, there were at most 500 steps between the bathroom, the kitchen, and the work desk. And that's bad. And we're doing harm to ourselves. Because now we can move on to the tools for how to help ourselves when a very strong stress factor occurs. So this is something we need to be doing all the time. But right now, here and now, as a form of emergency aid, what should we do? I know what's coming will be boring. Breathing. So what's the trick? We have an autonomic nervous system. What does autonomic mean? It activates regardless of whether we want it to or not. There is the sympathetic, the non-sympathetic, and the parasympathetic. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated, it's fight or flight. That's when an explosion happens somewhere, God forbid. Or when air defense is triggered. We're like, what is that? Was it an outgoing or an incoming strike? And when it's like, oh, it was outgoing, okay. But when, God forbid, it's incoming, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in with a we will mode. And our task is to somehow switch over to the parasympathetic system. What is the parasympathetic system responsible for? In English, rest and digest. Rest and digest. And with the help of breathing, we have that switch. And you don't need to breathe for 10 minutes. You don't need to meditate for 30 minutes. If you can, great. Because when people say, oh God, meditation, you have to go to a Buddhist monastery to learn it. No, it's enough to take 3 slightly deeper inhales and exhales. An important element is that the exhale should be longer. For example, we inhale on 1, 2, 3, hold for a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then exhale, hold for a second. And that's how we get it. We focus on that. Our psyche is a time machine. We rarely stay in the here and now. Even when we're sitting in a board meeting thinking, God, I could just bite your head off right now, right? Sometimes someone says something, and you really want to say, do you even realize the nonsense you're talking? But we can't allow ourselves to do that.
At board meetings, those kinds of emotions generally don't exist. They're more positive and supportive in nature.
Always.
As a rule.
We strive for that, right? But suddenly, when you just want to blurt something out, to bring yourself back to the here and now, you can simply take a breath. You'll be out of the discussion for 10 seconds, but it's worth it. I do this when I'm talking to top executives who tend to be very difficult clients. Because sometimes it's microaggressions or even outright aggression directed at me. And if I respond in kind, a constructive conversation won't happen. My task is to somehow bring myself to a state of calm down. Yes.
Colleagues, let's take 10 minutes to breathe. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first part of our conversation about stress and the risks associated with the current situation in which we are now living and working. See you in the second part.